Kocho, Zhuanqi? Might be cousin.
Hello, I think.
Welcome everyone to What the Force, and also welcome to our first episode of our new segment, Defragmenting Droids, our look at the wonderful droids of the Star Wars universe. We will not only look at the history of these wonderful characters, but also the deeper purpose and meaning they have. As a disclaimer, there can be a lot of exceptions to the generalities that I'm about to make. A lot of this is my own take on these beloved droids, and in general, I will be looking at them from a current canon perspective. The Star Wars saga is an organic storytelling method that will shift over time. The story group are now the keepers of the story, and they have expanded upon George Lucas's original vision. They help guide the ship, but each captain manages their own narrative property themselves, be it a movie, cartoon, comic, or book. This helps iterate the overall narrative, adding and adjusting to the whole. So that means that what is true today might be adjusted as new narratives are released, and that could inevitably change our perspectives on the characters. This is really something to wrap our heads around, because sometimes we as fans view characters from a certain perspective, and that whatever is true today must always be true, even if the narrative that is being told offers new insight into the history and the character's past. These have, in current culture, become highly emotional issues for us, as the characters in the saga have, in a way, formed a bond with us at key formative experiences. This makes us nostalgic, and that's okay. But we make the mistake of viewing the story only from our own perspective, from our certain point of view, as Obi-Wan would say. And we need to allow the narrative to change with new information. With that out of the way, I would like to talk about droids in the larger context of the Star Wars universe. I think it's important to kind of set the ground rules so that everybody's on the same page. Maybe you haven't picked up on these things. Maybe there's more that I've missed, but I want to kind of give some background into what are droids in Star Wars. Droids function as the general labor of Star Wars. Any menial task, if you are able to afford a droid, they do it. They all usually have a primary function or job that they specialize in, such as mechanic, translator, protocol droid, programmers, pilots, traditional servants, security, soldiers, caretakers, healthcare professionals, and it goes on and on. They fulfill any job a humanoid isn't prepared to do. In addition, they're also like mobile computers. Some of them can hold large amounts of computational data, including hyperspace coordinates when a navicomputer is absent. Some have even been reprogrammed or have learned skills that allow them to take on different or additional work. For the sake of this deep dive, I want to mention just a few things about droids. The first thing is that all droids have a basic set of commands or directives which allow them to fulfill their primary function or role. Restraining bolts seem to prevent a droid from disobeying these commands or directives. Second, they all have protocols which they must obey. We have proof of this from a few sources, including The Force Awakens novelization, where BB-8 wants to disobey Poe as he's escaping from the village on Jakku, but he can't disobey his protocols of a direct order from Poe. They must obey whoever is their direct master. Third, they're all slaves bound to a master or masters, and they must obey that person. There are masterless droids in canon. They call them manumated droids, and there's a few examples that we've seen. There's been bounty hunters in the Clone Wars that have been freed. There's also IG-88, which we assume as a bounty hunter in the original trilogy was freed, as well as a droid called Cone that we learn about in the visual dictionary, who is in the background of Rogue One on Jedha. He has a really interesting story. He says he was manumated and was looking to trade his programming skills for credits so that he could upgrade himself to understand spirituality. That's a really wonderful concept. Fourth, Droids feel emotion, they can feel pain, they can feel fear of danger or of being destroyed. To me, this is really interesting because when you think about droids, you don't think of them necessarily as having emotion, but we know C-3PO especially has reacted fearfully, happily, proud. He really does express these emotions. R2-D2 expresses these emotions. BB-8 is incredibly sad that when he finds out that Poe Dameron was killed, as well as they can feel pain. I don't know if this is actually universal to all droids, but in the Jabba the Hutt palace, we see a droid actually being tortured in an antechamber where the droids are being reprocessed. There's a lot of open questions for me about why and how and all of those things, but we'll just use that as a universal truth right now. The fifth thing is that droids can dream, and I think that this is really wonderful. Occasionally you'll hear a droid asking for a chance to power down or to go into standby mode. We know that R2-D2 in The Force Awakens was using his low power mode to defragment his memories and all of the data that he had collected all of the years, and ended up drifting in and out of dreams of his past adventures, which gives him a real feeling of being an old man at that point in the movie. Yeah, just, he's dreaming of his past and he's just going through all of his old data. 6, droids are viewed by organics as effectively toasters of the Star Wars universe. They're appliances. They fulfill purposes, but they shouldn't have rights. Nobody gives their droids rights. There's some really interesting work done in the Vader comic and again with Dr. Aphra, and hopefully we'll get to that in this segment down the road, all about these really interesting droids that kind of play with the idea of what it is to be. I think that there's a lot to explore in this general topic, and it's what is free, what is conscious, what do all these things represent? So these are kind of just the general rules of the universe right now, and we're just kind of laying them out to help set the context by which sometimes sentient organics seem to react like droids don't really matter. The 7th thing that we've noticed is that droids require power and maintenance. We see this on Dagobah when Luke asks if R2 would like to plug in for a while. We also see that they like to get oil baths and like to get nice treatments so that their gears are working better. It definitely seems like droids need to be upkept. The 8th thing is, and I think that this is the most important that will come into play in especially this topic that we're going to be talking about today, but also future topics, is people who refuse to wipe their droids will have their droids develop personality, which allows them to learn from their experiences and gives them memories by which they can almost build subroutines on how to handle new situations. This enables them in some aspects to justify disobeying their master's orders. For example, stay here. But if they see their master is in danger, they can justify leaving that spot and saving them. That seems to only come with a vast amount of experience that they've been able to defragment and almost reprogram themselves. We see this in the best example possible with R2-D2 kind of doing whatever needs to happen. But also C-3PO has later on in the original trilogy really takes it upon himself to do certain actions on his own. I like to think about this as not wiping your droids ends up building a base level of consciousness. Like, it seems to allow them to learn, handle new situations, and unfortunately, without retained long-term memories, these droids are no more complex than your average Roomba. And in many ways, sentient organics treat all droids regardless of how complex they're functioning or their ability to talk, like complex Roombas. It is the Star Wars best practice to wipe your droid regularly. Droids actually realize this is happening in universe when Bail Organa at the end of Revenge of the Sith takes on C-3PO and R2-D2 and asks Captain Antilles to wipe the protocol droid of his memory. Both C-3PO and R2-D2 visibly and verbally freak out at this thought. They're upset. C-3PO says, "Oh my, like you're getting rid of this droid's personhood." In a way, I have a little bit to say about personality and how I think that it retains no matter what through droid memory wipes. But in general, it's not a nice thing that sentient organics do to droids. And it seems like some data still exists. We see that with C-3PO and K-2SO in Rogue One. Cassian actually points it out that he still has some bad habits and some ways of talking about himself, or ways of talking for K-2SO. It seems like they retain at least maybe fragments of their memory or bits of their personality that are a little bit more stubborn to get rid of. Additionally, there also exists a method of forced servitude, restraining bolts. We discussed this a little bit earlier, but it limits the ability for the droid to disobey orders and run away. And it really begs the question about why restraining bolts were invented in universe. It's so fascinating. All of these thoughts really raise interesting ethical, philosophical, and cultural questions about the galaxy that they all live in. And you know, these are never answered in the current narrative, but I think it would be a really interesting story to tell in the future, like a Spartacus type droid that fights for their own freedom and then ends up freeing a bunch of fellow droids and leading a revolution in a part of the galaxy. I think that would just be a wonderful take on a hero's journey. Are you listening, Lucasfilm? I shall endeavor to talk about more of these complex issues in future episodes, but for now, and all of this being said, my position is that droids are people too, and now let's talk about them. Our first droid is R2-D2, probably the most beloved droid in all of Star Wars. This cute, plucky half-pint droid is beyond loyal to his friends. And in fact, he has several nicknames, primarily R2, but Ahsoka in the Clone Wars actually calls him in the start R2-y, which is so annoyingly cute. R2 for short, as most characters end up calling him, was the first character we see on screen in Star Wars in 1977. As a clarification, for the sake of this episode, I will be referring to R2-D2 as him or he. Robots don't really have a gender, but it has been pointed out to me and stated in the visual dictionary that R2-D2 was actually programmed as a male. The first entry for him in the Star Wars A New Hope script reads as follows. An explosion rocks the ship as two robots, R2-D2 and C-3PO, struggle to make their way through the shaking and bouncing passageway. Both robots are old and battered. R2 is a short, claw-armed tripod. His face is a mass of computer lights surrounding a radar eye. C-3PO, on the other hand, is a tall, slender robot of human proportions. He has a gleaming bronze-like metallic surface of an Art Deco design. George Lucas was inspired by a few things, including Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress film, especially the two servants that eventually become R2 and C-3PO in Star Wars. R2 more specifically was inspired by the three silent robots known as Huey, Dewey, and Louie from the film Silent Running in 1972. Having a non-verbal character is a unique challenge and opportunity for a movie. How do they get their point across? How are they treated by the other characters in the film? This is done incredibly well in Star Wars. Some sentient organics actually communicate directly with R2 if they can understand him, and some end up ignoring him and relying on C-3PO to translate. Very few people actually understand R2 directly, and C-3PO is one of the only ones who can communicate with him. They often ignore him, or C-3PO refuses to translate. But his beeps come off as humanistic, filled with emotion. His actions fill a character and fill space in the story. It's really wonderful what they've done with R2. How did they get him to appear so larger than life on screen? Well, visually, R2-D2 was originally conceptualized by Ralph McQuarrie and then created by the Star Wars special effects team, co-developed by John Steers and built by Tony Dyson. R2's unique sounds, which give him his minimalistic voice, were actually created by the main sound designer of Star Wars in the original trilogy, Ben Burtt. He recognized that R2 was going to be another actor on the set and needed to have real interactions. After many attempts of using electronic ranges of sounds, he incorporated a human sound with electronic to give the character a human range of emotions. That's really a wonderful insight in that R2 has to feel like he's got feelings and expressions. Originally, R2 was remote controlled with his 3-wheeled legs, but when he needed to move around differently or have a different action take place, he was fulfilled by the English actor Kenny Baker. Kenny Baker portrayed him in the original trilogy and was given credit in the prequel trilogy, but R2-D2 was mostly CGI at that point. For The Force Awakens, producer Kathleen Kennedy actually hired 2 fans, Lee Towersay and Oliver Steeples, to build the new R2-D2 robots for the films after being impressed with their working replicas that were brought to Celebration Europe in 2013. These 2 were part of the R2-D2 Builders Club, which is just a really interesting way to get involved in Star Wars. Become so good at being a fan that you're invited to be part of the universe. They now work for Lucasfilm and have worked on many droids since then. In episode 7 and 8, Jimmy V played R2 for non-remote controlled actions. So it took not only a team to conceptualize what he's going to look like, how he's going to work, etc., but it takes a team of people to bring R2-D2 to life. Now, let's look at the major role he plays in the narrative throughout the saga and the themes that present themselves. R2-D2 is unique amongst droids. He has been allowed to retain his memory, and his databanks are filled with information from the start of his creation. There are a few notable exceptions to that. He had a slight memory wipe in Clone Wars of a few hours, and when he essentially lost consciousness on the Death Star run in A New Hope after being shot. For that whole length of time, he has been developing, storing memories, storing additional data that he's captured from other places, and that has turned him into a droid with a unique level of self-efficacy. He is heroic and he has a selfless personality. I believe that in the narrative, we can attribute that to the key relationships that he has had. He takes on a different role with each of these relationships, but it's really interesting to see how, especially in current canon, they flesh out his character that much more. The first relationship and his first owner really ties the whole narrative and relationships he has with sentient organics together. And that was Padme Amidala. Padme is his original owner because as soon as R2-D2, an R-series droid, was assembled by the Nubian Industrial Automation Droid Factory, he was quickly brought aboard the Queen of Naboo's starship to be in her service. He was one of several astromechs that was aboard the ship, although rarely called into service until that fateful day when she fled Naboo. Throughout The Phantom Menace and the events therein, We see that he assists with the pod race. He is around for strategic plans of the attack on Naboo and the resistance to fight back. He plays a key role in assisting Anakin in the Naboo space battle, destroying the battle droid control ship. And through the story, builds a key relationship with Anakin. I imagine that them both being mechanics, they actually have quite a bit to speak about. And Anakin from very early can actually understand him. He continues in Padme's service after this event as Anakin goes and joins the Jedi Temple, and R2-D2 is still her droid. It's really interesting because 10 years pass and we know certain things. R2-D2 is still her personal astromech. He lives with her in her apartment in Coruscant. He travels with her in her fighter when she arrives in Coruscant. He helps maintain a security field for her personal chambers. So what does that mean? Well, to me, we know a fair amount about senators in the New Republic as well as the Galactic Senate from the Clone Wars. Senators who are fairly active, like Padme, are often going off on their own missions, sometimes secretly, to gather information or to conduct diplomacy between warring parties. One would think that in the 10 years between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, that Padme would have continued this process. So R2-D2, her personal astromech, was probably on all of these adventures and missions with Padme. In fact, Captain Typho actually says when Obi-Wan is worried about, Anakin, don't get in trouble, as Anakin and Padme are attempting to go back to Naboo to hide. Captain Typhoid points out, well, Padme's more likely to get him in trouble than he is to get her in trouble because she's been the one who's been going on adventures. R2-D2 continues to serve her directly, including serving her food, helping and following her around. And really, I think that she contributes heavily to his sense of what is right and wrong in the universe, to have a certain amount of curiosity and tenacity. He certainly, by Attack of the Clones, has developed that, whereas in The Phantom Menace, he doesn't seem to have that as much. And I would say that she also really helps to form his moral compass. How R2 behaves is very much in line of how we see the character of Padme Amidala behave. We also see that he is more than willing to jump off the ship in Attack of the Clones and rescue Padme from the droid factory. This kind of lends to the idea that she gets herself in trouble a fair amount and he ends up having to go and rescue her. He knew it was going to happen. He gets in an argument with C-3PO and says, look, we have to go. C-3PO doesn't believe him, but follows him, and R2 ends up saving the day once again. At the end of Attack of the Clones, we see that the wedding between Anakin and Padme has happened. And from this point on, in canon, C-3PO is now with Padme 100% of the time, and R2-D2 is with Anakin 100% of the time. I'm not sure if it's officially canon, but I believe that they were exchanged as wedding gifts with their marriage. And so R2-D2 becomes Anakin's personal droid in the Clone Wars, and Obi-Wan refers to him, R2-D2, as Anakin's droid. Ahsoka, treats R2 as Anakin's droid. Everybody treats R2 as Anakin's droid. It just sort of, even though you're not allowed to own anything, he seems to own him. It's a very interesting dynamic, and I think the Jedi were just ignoring the fact that, he now had a brand new astromech droid. When Anakin takes over his service, he primarily functions as his core astromech for his fighter, his main mechanic assistant whenever he needs to do mechanical labor, as well as his general security and please fix this computer problem we have with anything. He also stores a lot of navigational data, a lot of information from the Republic Army and the Jedi Council throughout the Clone Wars. He is chocked full of this information, quite literally. Padme never wiped R2-D2's memory. He remembered everything that had happened from his creation, and Anakin continues this practice. In fact, Anakin fights for the right to not have R2-D2's memory wiped, even when it put the Republic fleet and the war in question. one point, R2-D2 is captured and then sold to General Grievous. And it's putting the whole Clone Wars at risk from the Republic side. And Anakin still fights to go, putting many people at risk to go and save R2-D2 and ensure that he is going to be okay. He really treats him like a friend. And this is something that I'm going to point out probably throughout the droid shows. If you treat the droids in the Star Wars universe as people, you are an important person in the Star Wars universe. This is something that we see with Rey, we see with Poe, we see with Finn, who talks directly and has conversations with BB-8. We see with Rey, who saves BB-8's life. Anakin himself, and then Luke over time ends up treating R2-D2 as a person. It's just really interesting because these people who are heroes in their own right hold these droids to a human level. And as Anakin declines and falls from the light, we see that he stops treating R2 as a person. He stops seeing the humanity that lives in his circuit. It's just a really, really interesting theme that we see with Anakin especially. Under Anakin, R2-D2 also becomes friends with Ahsoka, and Ahsoka takes R2 on a mission in the Clone Wars to Ilum with a group of younglings who are seeking out their lightsaber crystals for the first time, their kyber crystals. And they also, through the course of this arc in the Clone Wars, build their own lightsabers. I really think that this is important because it's just another piece of information in addition to all of the Jedi information that R2 has in his archives and all of the Empire information that he has accessible to him and can explain how certain people like Luke learned things later on in the narrative. From Anakin, R2 takes on several characteristics which change him in the narrative and in his own story. He speaks his mind and he worries for his master. He is the one who notices that Anakin has changed the most other than Padme. He also becomes very forward and will beep at Anakin, arguing with him. Anakin will argue back. They act like old friends by the end of the Clone Wars. He learns how to be a hero. And actually, by the end of the Clone Wars, he's a hero in his own right. He's on his own droid mission, kind of by the end of the Clone Wars episodes, which he learns that, the most important thing is compassion and protecting those you care about and total selflessness. He is willing to risk it all for those that are worth saving. R2 was Anakin's droid at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and he noticed that Anakin was slipping. And I think that at one point he made the decision to walk away, which we know is almost impossible for droids who do not have retained memories. This must have been a very difficult decision for him, but he chose to protect Padme and her pregnancy and his best friend, C-3PO. C-3PO is the next most important relationship to our little droid R2-D2. They become introduced together at the start of the saga, but don't really become kind of counterparts or co-workers until Anakin and Padme get together and end up getting married. They form a long-term relationship from this original beginning. Generally speaking, their relationship is quite funny. C-3PO always thinks he knows best and finds R2-D2's thoughts and beeps to be rather silly or strange or doesn't really believe him in many ways. R2 sort of ignores C-3PO when he's rambling on in his own way, and C-3PO outright won't translate for R2 when he doesn't believe R2-D2, even when it's in everybody's best interest that he listen to R2-D2 and actually translate for him. We hear this frankness between them in the exchanges where C-3PO reacts to something that R2 has said. Naked? My parts are showing. Like, R2 is willing to just say whatever is on his mind to C-3PO because he can actually understand him. And C-3PO really does think he knows best. But what we learn is that R2-D2 actually knows best. He warns him about Anakin and asks him to warn others. And C-3PO just, brushes it off and says, he's just under a lot of stress. It's like, no, listen to the little droid. They become really longtime companions. And what I want to define this as is not just the Skywalker family, but I guess, Padme is technically a Skywalker once they get married, but it's really the Amidala family. And Anakin through her children, Luke and Leia, through her. In the Clone Wars, actually, we see several instances of domestic life for the Skywalker Amidala household. There's one episode where they're preparing for a diplomatic entertaining event, and Anakin is attempting to help her prepare for it and sends C-3PO, who has been helping set up the event, out into the marketplace, but insists that R2-D2 go along with him because he doesn't believe that C-3PO can do it on his own. And R2-D2 is the one that he trusts the most to get it done. This is quite common. R2 tries to get stuff done. C-3PO thinks he knows best. They both end up getting in trouble. This is just how things happen. It's like a Roman or a Greek comedy about servants all the time with these two. Additionally, C-3PO always believes that R2 is going to get distracted, but Anakin and Padme have more faith in R2-D2 than C-3PO. However, Padme recognizes C-3PO at the end of the episode because she knows that's how he's driven. She knows that R2-D2 doesn't need that recognition, and very rarely does R2 get a ton of recognition throughout the saga. It's really important to point out that even though they fight, even though they disagree, even though I'm sure R2-D2 is yelling at him and calling him a mindless philosopher over and over in his beeps, that C-3PO is his best friend, really his only companion in many ways, and he loses his memory. It's taken from him by Bail Organa. And I think that R2 understands the reason, but he doesn't stop that relationship that is built by the end of the Clone Wars. During Rebels, we know that he has been given missions from Bail Organa that do not include his counterpart C-3PO. In the Ahsoka novel, he runs into Ahsoka again and convinces Bail that Ahsoka is a good person and that Bail is a good person and that their interests are aligned. He has been involved with transfer of secret information, ensuring that certain things are happening when they need to be, and C-3PO is never in the know of these secret missions. The banter and insults continue, but when they're parted and come back together, no matter the circumstances, they are both incredibly happy to see one another. This happens in the Sand Trawler in A New Hope when they see each other again. R2-D2 and C-3PO touch, and C-3PO says, R2-D2, it is you, it is you. Also in Cloud City and in Return of the Jedi, when they come back together, they start to chat about all of their adventures that they have been through on their own, and that they're just so happy to see each other and share what has happened with each other. And then in Return of the Jedi on the sail barge, they have like the cutest interaction where they're trying to like figure out how to get out of this situation, but R2's not worried because he's in the know and C-3PO is left in the dark. I would say that C-3PO loves his counterpart, and it's incredibly clear by the end of A New Hope when his friend is shot. He is unconscious by any rational means, and in his obvious distress, he offers any of his circuits or parts to heal his hurt friend. And it's just really wonderful to see this banter between the two droids. It is an incredible loyalty that they have for each other that was built over 60 years, but I can understand why R2-D2 gets lippy with his good friend if you had been ignored for all of that time. The last relationships I'm actually going to loop together because even though they're two separate people, they represent the same continuation of the loyalty that R2-D2 has for Padme Amidala, and that's for her two children, Luke and Leia. R2-D2 is loyal, and since her death, serves Padme's children. Though in the service of Bail Organa at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and Captain Antilles as his secondary person, I believe that he's actually serving Leia. And there's a little bit of evidence to this in that he never truthfully reacts to Captain Antilles in canon or in A New Hope like he is his master. And even with Bail Organa around or as a person, he doesn't react to Bail Organa as his core relationship thread or the tether he feels towards a master. Though in the service of Captain Antilles at the beginning of A New Hope, R2-D2 immediately accepts this mission from Leia. And, it is a very important mission, which is this, securing the Death Star plans. The key message is to entreat General Kenobi to assist her in bringing him back. The original mission was just to bring General Kenobi back to the rebellion, to help out, to help defeat the Empire because it is the most desperate hour. But additionally, R2-D2 knows that he has the Death Star plans within him and he must protect himself and bring General Kenobi to Alderaan. I would argue that in the full context of the saga, by A New Hope, R2-D2 knows how important his mission is. And with his experience in the Clone Wars, his secret missions that he's been on, it's given him a drive and an understanding to act where other droids would fail. He has one mission: find Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he is utterly relentless. He goes above and beyond what we see any other droid do in the Star Wars saga. He comes up with a daring escape plan from the captured ship in an escape pod. With or without C-3PO, he's willing to leave, his best friend. He correctly guesses that there are more settlements in the rocky areas and even separates from his friend C-3PO when C-3PO refuses to come. When reunited and purchased for the Lars farm, he lies to both Luke and C-3PO, and even with a restraining bolt on, convinces them that he's experiencing issues due to it and that he needs to have the restraining bolt removed so that he can run away and find General Kenobi. He only seems to officially transfer into Luke's service once his original mission from Leia is complete. Leia's back in his view, and his mission with the Death Star plans being delivered to the rebellion is successful. At that point, Luke takes over primary ownership of R2-D2, and they are very rarely apart. Luke is sometimes patronizing of R2, but one thing to note, and this is fairly clear from the original trilogy, Luke doesn't understand him unless he's specifically reading a readout of his words on his face or in his X-Wing. R2 attempts to advise him, but Luke, who is always thinking about the future and never where he is, doesn't seem to recognize that R2 actually has very good advice, and it takes him a long, long time to learn that R2's advice is actually worthwhile to listen to. At the end of the saga, and I would say throughout Luke's relationship with R2, R2 has been trying to protect him, trying to guide him, trying to mentor him. He certainly has a lot of suggestions, oh, why don't you put it on auto drive? Oh no, I like to leave it manual for a while. He's just trying to help out this kid that I would say R2 views as very much a nephew or, the son of his former master. He's really just trying to protect him. And by the end of The Last Jedi, the wonderful scene of R2-D2 showing Leia's original message calling Luke and Obi-Wan to action is intrinsically tied to who R2-D2 is. He remembers everything, and his memories are valuable, and he knows humans, and he knows this family, and he knows what's important, and he ensures that Padme's son remembers that he needs to be a hero one more time. R2's relationship with Luke is pretty complex. I would say that in the current narrative, he views Anakin as a failure. What ended up happening with Anakin is a failure, that Anakin fell, that he wasn't able to stop it. And then again, what happened before The Force Awakens, the destruction of the Jedi Temple. When Luke leaves, what does R2 have to live for? He goes into low power mode, almost like a depression. Only when there's a chance to be of service to Luke one last time to find him, to bring him back? Does he reactivate? This role that he plays as almost like a surrogate uncle or mentor is just really fascinating that we get to see this whole journey of this droid through the relationships that he has built along the way. The other important piece that R2 fulfills within the Star Wars universe is he is the documenter of the Skywalker legacy. I would argue that it's primarily the Amidala legacy that he's documenting, and regardless of the fact that Anakin is the Virgins in the Force or the Chosen One, he's loyal to Padme Amidala and her family, including Anakin. What's also really, really interesting is that if you view it from this perspective, that he's this documenter of the legacy, it calls into question whether he is actually the hero that we see him be. And we'll get into that in just a moment. R2-D2 and his counterpart C-3PO are the observer narrators of the Star Wars universe. They bear witness to the wonders of this story. This is often done in storytelling because we need a normal perspective to really understand these heroes or main characters, that they are extreme. If we viewed everything from these heroes' perspective, it wouldn't be believable. And this is actually a failure that some movies take by showing us the perspective of the extreme superhero rather than the observer. These things need to be wonderful, and we need a normal perspective in which to view them. An example of this outside of Star Wars is actually Watson in the Sherlock Holmes stories. Watson is a normal guy. He's a physician, he's a former soldier, and an average person in the world of Sherlock Holmes. He views Sherlock's abilities as extreme and wonderful, and it puts it into perspective for the observer or the audience that these were able to happen. Many times we see R2-D2 commenting on things that are happening, or we see things from their perspective in the Star Wars universe. Especially in a universe of space wizards, there needs to be this semi-normal perspective to stand in for our reactions. Force wielders are kind of like demigods in Greek myth. It's weird and wonderful what they can do. But this also adds a layer to the idea that Star Wars is modern day mythos. In myth, important events have to have a witness. In mythology and religion, it's a common motif to have a miracle borne witness to. Gods or demigods have witnesses or call upon people to witness their wonders. Hercules had the Aegean king's son bear witness to him cleaning the stables. In Christianity, the angels call upon the shepherds to bear witness to Jesus' birth. There needs to be a record of these wonders happening in mythology to share, to have the story live on. And that's a common thread in the Star Wars saga, and actually something that Rian Johnson really calls on to through sharing of the stories of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. In universe, R2-D2 has been recording and keeping the Skywalker family legend alive since that fateful day on Naboo. In many ways, R2-D2 fulfills this role more than C-3PO, let alone that C-3PO has had his memory wiped. R2-D2 is always watching and recording. This was also confirmed by George Lucas, who said R2-D2 is his ultimate framing device, that the entire story of Star Wars is actually being recounted to the keeper of the Journal of the Wills 100 years after the events of Return of the Jedi, that R2 is actually recording these. This was quoted in How to Conquer the Universe by Chris Taylor, and I really find that idea incredibly fascinating because certainly that's how it seems in the narrative. And whether that's still the case and that's where R2-D2 is going will be really interesting to see. He witnesses every major part of the adventure and often saves the day at the right critical moment. It's almost like he's retelling the story and making sure he gets his fair share of the glory. We know R2-D2 was George's favorite character. He would make sure that in every movie, R2-D2 got his moment to shine and save the day all by himself. We see that in every single movie, and it actually continued on in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. The Force Awakens, he awakens at the right moment, has the rest of the map. And in The Last Jedi, he delivers that key message to Luke Skywalker to encourage him to be a hero one last time. One can almost imagine that scene in Attack of the Clones where he starts flying through the droid factory like a superhero, him describing these events to the documenter. The keeper of the Journal of the Whills is just rolling his eyes at this little droid as he exaggerates his own part in the story. It's just a really hilarious idea that R2 is either exaggerating his own place, or maybe these things really did happen exactly the way that he says. He seems like very to the point, so I think they actually did. Many times also he serves as a foil or a storytelling enhancer. So he'll add pitch to certain scenes or drama to the story with how R2-D2 reacts. At one point he'll shake and go because he's scared, and he wants us to realize that we should be scared too. Or his beeps will become very quiet and cautious because he wants us to feel quiet and cautious. It's just really wonderful how he frames the story. So let's get into the major events that R2 has witnessed via the Skywalker legend. The first event and life that he documented was the life of Padme Amidala's. And we've gone into this a fair amount with how Padme contributed to his personality, but she is a key figure in the galaxy. She is a leader in the Senate. She was the queen of her own planet and a force of change in the galaxy. What she said meant something. And that's why I say that although many people will say that R2 is documenting the Skywalker legacy, primarily it's her legacy that he's documenting. She's his original owner. She is the one who he's most loyal to. And this starts out all of the saga, her ownership of him. He also documents the courtship and marriage of Padme and Anakin, which is the catalyst by which the galaxy is thrown into turmoil. Without Padme and Anakin falling in love and having a child, there would be less danger to the galaxy. No Vader created, certainly. It's interesting to think that R2 didn't see the major dark events that Anakin went through in Attack of the Clones. He was sent back to wait on the ship, and whenever Anakin does that, he doesn't want R2 to witness what he's about to do. R2-D2 is sent back to the ship in Attack of the Clones before Anakin goes looking for his mother and the Sand People and ends up slaughtering the village. R2 is also sent back to the ship in Revenge of the Sith before Anakin goes and slaughters the Separatists. It's like in the scene in Princess Bride when things become very dark and the narrator, the grandpa, looks at the kid and says, "Are you sure you still want me to read this? It gets a little dark here." R2 doesn't see these things happen directly, but we know they did, and we know that he is affected by them. R2 is also not around at the slaughtering of the Jedi Temple, so his view of Anakin is more colored to say he is the hero that we see in the Clone Wars cartoon and the hero of the Republic until the very end of Anakin's fall, when R2 chooses to go with Padme and the choice of the future, her two children. I can't imagine how helpless R2 must have felt when Anakin walked down that path, probably one of his best friends beyond C-3PO and Padme. It must have been heartbreaking for this little droid. With the birth of the twins and the New Hope being born and Padme dying, he really did transfer his service to these two, and he bears witness to their birth and her death. And although he goes along with Bail Organa taking the droids, he never serves him. He serves her. Even though he helps him, as soon as she gives him a mission, he follows it along. Another key event is bringing Luke back into the rebellion, bringing Obi-Wan into the rebellion. I really love the scene when R2-D2 has escaped into the desert and is hiding in the rocks, and Luke and C-3PO come across him and are attacked by Sand People, and Obi-Wan saves them. And Obi-Wan says, "Hello there, my little friend." People complain like, Why didn't Obi-Wan remember R2-D2? And I think with the new editions of the narrative, he actually did, especially with the Kenobi comic and some of the additions in the Star Wars comic itself. We see that Ben Kenobi was constantly being told to stay away from Luke by Lars. He got in trouble several times when he rescued Luke as a small child and brought him back to his aunt and uncles. Actually, at one point, Owen Lars comes to Ben Kenobi's hut and yells at him to stay away from him. I think that at the time, he was planning on returning Luke to his aunt and uncle, if you view it from this current narrative. And that only when he sees the message and he realizes that it's actually time to bring Luke back into this world and hands Luke the lightsaber, does he actually accept that, no, this is the time. I must convince this boy that he must come with me. There's a really interesting moment. C-3PO has shut himself down to conserve some power. I'm just going to shut myself off for a little while. And Obi-Wan pulls out the Skywalker lightsaber and hands it to Luke. And in that moment, R2-D2 quite literally freaks out. He's beeping and moving around. And it seems like, in the context of the original movie, actually very out of place. But in the new narrative, to make sense, he recognizes the lightsaber. He didn't realize Obi-Wan had it, and he's trying to encourage Luke to accept the pro-offered Excalibur that Obi-Wan is offering him. He also witnesses the death of Obi-Wan Kenobi at the hands of Darth Vader. I'm not sure that there's anything really important to say about this, but it's really fascinating that R2 is actually present for all of these events. And then leading up to the Battle of the Death Star, we have a neat moment when the ground crew asks Luke, would he like to get a new droid? This one seems a little beat up. And he says, no, this little droid and I have already been through a lot together. I wouldn't bet my life on any other droid. And C-3PO is genuinely worried about his friend. But R2 has been through this all before. And in the current narrative, it's actually really fascinating because astromechs are typically not used for things like this. I mean, yeah, they're used for fighters, but of an astromech that was serving aboard a starship, R2 is incredibly brave to be placed in the service of Luke and know exactly what to do in a fighter. He knows exactly what to do, and he's excited to have the opportunity to help out Luke in this battle. And actually, he lends his leadership and his experience to Luke. He knows exactly what to do to help him out in those situations. It's really wonderful when you view the whole canon now with this unique perspective that he lived this life before he was in the service of Luke. And this leads us to the scene where Luke is on his attack run and Vader can sense that the Force is strong with this one. He senses Luke and he shoots R2-D2. He is unable to destroy the X-Wing, but shoots R2. R2 is effectively unconscious, and it's almost amazing that by adding this narrative that R2 used to be Anakin's droid, Anakin shoots R2, and R2 unknowingly saves his son from being killed. It's like so wonderful to add that layer of richness to the story that Darth Vader was not able to kill his son because of his former best friend. It's just magical. The destruction of the Death Star happens. He was not able to actually see that, but he realizes it later once he's repaired. The next important pieces that he sees are his training on Dagobah and becoming a Jedi, and generally the growth of Luke as a Jedi is really fascinating because between Empire and Return of the Jedi, we know that once he leaves Yoda, his training incomplete, that there's time that passes and he makes his own lightsaber. He is stronger in the Force. And there was always an open question for me of how did Luke do this on his own without the assistance of Yoda? Presumably without too much assistance from Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan didn't seem to show up very often. And this ties back to one of the events that R2-D2 was actually witness to. He saw lightsabers being created. He saw kyber crystals being found. Theoretically, he could have told Luke a lot about the Jedi of old, about the name Darth Sidious, for example, that is pulled up in The Last Jedi. That could have been also Force ghosts, but I liked the idea that R2 has actually been contributing to Luke's knowledge of the Force and of the Jedi and of the history of the Jedi with all of their time together. R2 is also there for the death of Yoda and for Han and Leia falling in love. After Return of the Jedi, we know that Luke traveled the galaxy. He set up the New Order. R2 was with him as his constant companion. He was also there at the destruction of the Jedi Temple. And when Luke left, he provided the key to finding Luke. And the last bit, inspiration, he needed to be a hero one more time. He witnesses and takes part in almost every major part of the adventure, often saving the day right at the critical moment. It's almost like he's telling this story and that he's ensuring that he is part of it. R2 is really special to me, and I think it's because he's just such a brave, logical, almost unreasonably loyal character. He genuinely cares for the Skywalker family and for C-3PO, and he just doesn't take BS. He's funny, he's a hero. Where other droids might have been sold for scrap, he's kept, he's retained. He's there under a blanket in the Resistance base in TFA. He's a skilled mechanic. He's a slicer. He can open security doors. He also is a portable holo capture tool to retain memories. His relationship with C-3PO also has this connotation for the larger motif of Star Wars. You'll have to forgive me as I go a little bit into C-3PO's character here, but they're tied together, so it's kind of important. C-3PO is his counterpart, but he's also his equal and opposite, where C-3PO can speak 6 million forms of communication. R2-D2 has only one, and it's rarely understood by anyone. They handle opposite ends of work. C-3PO is etiquette, protocol, what is the correct thing to do in any situation. And R2-D2 is a blue-collared mechanic, literally. R2-D2 is always watching and thinking and observing what is happening, and 3PO is always surprised by humans. He doesn't know why people do things the way they do them. And even down to R2-D2 is short and fat, and C-3PO is tall and thin. They are the yin and yang of the droids of the Star Wars universe. And together, they balance each other out. They're always better together in their stories. When they're separated, sometimes they're panicked and lost and don't know what to do with themselves. R2 also has developed these really wonderful relationships with sentient organics in the cartoon and in the saga. He treats Anakin as a friend. Luke treats him more like a pet or a child, often laughing at his assumptions until later on in the saga when R2 seeks him out and he views him like an old friend. As a child, I would watch the original trilogy on TV and I would stare up at R2 on the screen, first character rolling through the hallway in A New Hope, and he was cute and funny based on how people reacted to him. He was always brave, and I was really upset when he was shot in A New Hope by Vader. I was overjoyed when he was reunited with C-3PO in Empire. When the prequels were released in theaters, he was one of my favorite characters to see on screen. He seemed younger, less experienced, which seemed appropriate, but by Revenge of the Sith, he was his old heroic self. Honestly, I'm a little worried about our little droid. Narratively speaking, his family that he's been protecting his whole life is gone. Luke is gone. Now, Leia, with Carrie Fisher's passing, I'm worried about who's going to take him. Who will he protect and save and advise in the future? Droids don't live the lives of organics, but this little guy has had one hell of a life. I'm just worried about his future when he has no one to save. But either way, I hope we get to hear more stories about R2-D2. And I hope that we do really get to see him telling his whole story in the Journal of the Whills in the future. This has been the What the Force podcast. I hope you've enjoyed our first segment of Defragmenting Droids. There will be some fun links in the liner notes for this episode, so check it out if you're interested in more R2-D2. I always am. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a review on iTunes or seek us out on Twitter at WT Force Show and start a conversation. Cheers.